Hey guys, Winston here for Carbide 3D. Is anyone listening? Throw me a message in the chat if you're on, and also give me some feedback on microphone volume. Excellent. Okay, I will try and talk a little louder or just lean into the microphone a little bit more. Let me try adjusting my microphone gain a tiny bit higher. Okay. Well, let me throw my face on the screen so you guys can see me. How's everyone doing? The epidemiological situation is getting a little crazy here. I'm currently in Los Angeles and sheltering at home. So how's everyone else doing? Working from home, that's a good thing. Yeah, San Jose, Bay Area, you guys got it much sooner than we did. So stay safe out there. It's pretty crazy. Kids, yeah, that's a tough one. Are you guys able to still do some of the CNC stuff and still take care of the kids at the same time? Bunker down in Chicago, pretty much alone. Canada, San Antonio, yeah, it's gonna be interesting. But part of the reason why we wanted to do the live stream was just to be able to help you guys out, get some feedback, gives you some information in a much quicker, sooner, timely fashion. Just because we expect a lot of people are probably going to be at home and spending some quality time with their CNCs. So if you'll excuse the live streaming rust, it's been literally months since I fired up Open Broadcast Studio. We're going to do the best we can today to go through some basic Carbide Create stuff, some Fusion 360 stuff, and answer any questions you guys might have. I do not have someone just telling me what's coming up on the live chat, so if I'm just focused on the screen, I might miss a chat, but just feel free to pop it back up when I am looking at comments. Let's see, quarantine stuff is crazy, so I was thinking we might start out with just some really basic sort of what's new in Carbide Create. We just put out a video on Thursday about a new feature called Advanced V-Carving. And the way that works is, well, so let me go over first how regular V-Carving works. You pick a contour in Carbide Create, you hit V-Carve, you pick a V-bit, and then the toolpath will go basically in between the contours, trying finding the mathematical center, and it works all right if your contours aren't any wider than the diameter of the V-bit. So the usual V-bits we have are about ½ inch in diameter, but if you have a pocket that's wider than ½ inch, it really doesn't work too well. So we came up with advanced V-carving, which will basically create an offset contour inside what you're trying to cut out. So let me delete all this stuff. Let me make a new contour. We're going to go with, how about a simple cat? Nope, nope. Let's go dogs. So if you have a contour that you're trying to cut out, Advanced V-Carve will allow you to pocket out the large flat areas and then just V-carve the important areas and give you a flat bottomed pocket. So that's what that would look like. And it's a two-part thing. You can see the parts where the V-bits trying to pocket it out. It's an approximation. A V-bit doesn't come to a perfect point, but it also doesn't work as a perfect flat end mill. But this will let you get pretty far and let you make some pretty intricate carvings that are just larger than the diameter of your end mill. And if you want to cut something shallow, like you're engraving like a cutting board or something, you don't want the end mill to plunge really, really far. This is a nice, quick and easy solution. So I just want to throw that out there because it is something new. Let's see, people coming in from Belgium, Connecticut, Australia. Central America, Panama City. So yeah, V-carve, advanced V-carving, it is 2 tools. You can pick a pocketing tool and you can pick a V-bit. You can disable pocketing, and then it will simply follow the contour around the outside. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Follow the contour around the outside, but then it won't pocket out the middle portion of it. So that's how it works. Let's see. I had a couple questions from the forums that I wanted to address really quickly. Julian asks about belts and calibration and my thoughts on that. So the way belts work in, like, on the Shapeoko is there are 2 anchors on either side, and there are M5 screws that go into those anchors and pull the belt. But usually when you attach them, now let me just switch to webcam only. So if you have 2 belts anchored on each side, you pull one taut, then on the other side you have an anchor and a bolt that goes into it. So as that bolt pulls the belt, technically it does stretch a little, and it's a little different for each person. But when the belt's anchored on one side, and then you pull it on the other until the threads catch the anchor, the difference between pulling it taut and really taut before the anchor catches is like 0.5 millimeter. So across 400 or 800 millimeters, you're going to have an error of like 0.025%, if that. So you can calibrate that out if you want. But for most people, their cuts across Shapeokos that are set up in different ways is going to be really like a fraction of a percent. So my thoughts on calibration is, if you're just a mom and pop shop in your garage making signs, no one's really going to care if your 30-inch sign is 30.01 inches wide or something. Nomad versus Shapeoko. These are completely different machines. It's apples to oranges. One of them comes pre-assembled. One of them you put it together as a kit. One of them uses a router. One of them uses a precision spindle. I sort of just use these depending on whether or not I just want like effortless accuracy. So the Nomad, I trust it to be pretty much the spindle would be trammed, the precision and the squareness of it to be really good. The Shapeoko, for woodworking purposes, it's for me. If I don't need like my part to mate up with a part made on like a Haas or something, it's good enough. You really sort of have to go into this not chasing like 1 thou or like 0.025 millimeters of precision. So it's really just having realistic expectations. This is a 4-digit price point machine, not a $10,000 or a $50,000 machine. But if you go slow and you calibrate the machine, you can actually get really good accuracy. We do have someone from the Carbide team from Torrance. Glad the shop is alive. Carbide Create 5. So no, this is version 461. It's currently in beta, and you can try it out now. Advanced V carving is going to be available to you guys to play with right now, so feel free to go try it out, and hopefully you guys can make some much cooler things with this. How do you know your belt is tight enough? You sort of do the guitar string pluck test. If it snaps back, if it has just a little bit of thrum, it's good. It's hard to sign, like you can't really put a scale on it and pull up, because depending on the length of your rail, you're going to get a different weight when you pull on it. But it's really just if it snaps back and when you turn on the steppers, you don't have a lot of play when you try and move the gantry. That should be good enough. Figuring out feeds and speeds. Okay, so if you don't know where to start, I'm going to draw your attention to the speeds and feeds tool database that we have in Carbide Create. If you don't know where to start at all, try starting here. These are all speeds and feeds that I experimentally came up with, and they should all be pretty safe. So for like an 1/8 inch cutter, I'd say about 45 inches per minute. For softwoods, 1/8 inch end mill, we go 60. And if your wood species is somewhere between there, you sort of just try it out, extrapolate. If you don't know, go with something safer. Go with a hardwood. You can always go faster later, but try and find the extreme end of what you're trying to machine, and then slowly increase the envelope. You don't want to just say like, oh, I'm gonna pretend this Paduke is MDF and just start screaming through the material. Start at the slower, more conservative end of the spectrum and move up. For plastics, it really depends on what kind of plastic you're machining. We have acrylic and polycarbonate in the database, but if you have, I don't know, polyethylene or PVC, you sort of have to look at what kind of plastic it is. So if you take a knife to a plastic like HDPE, you can actually shave off pieces of it. Whereas if you go to acrylic or a polycarbonate, which I would consider to be a hard plastic, you have a much harder time like getting a nice clean shaving off of it. Or you could try and do like the fingernail test. Can you basically figure out where your plastic fits in there. Worst case, just start with an acrylic speed and feed, and then increase it from there. So that's same thing, just like wood. Start at the more conservative end of the spectrum, and then start working your way up. With aluminum, our speeds and feeds are based off 6061, and then sorry about that. So if you're doing something like a 7000 series aluminum, that tends to be a lot more. It's a tougher material. It's stronger. So if you look at the material data sheet, it's about 30% stronger in all its mechanical properties. So you should probably back off on your depth of cut or your feed rate by 30% as well. Same with brass. Copper, it depends on your alloy. But it's basically just find a recipe that you know you can trust, and then work backwards from there and see, can I go a little faster than that, or do I have to go a little slower? Let's see. Let me try and make sure I don't miss any questions. Does advanced vCarve need the bit setter? So in this current implementation, advanced vCarve shows itself in the toolpath window as a single operation. So because of that, when you export it, it's all in one G-code file, which means you will need the bit setter. Now, if you're really insistent on using this, you can actually go into the G-code file that gets exported and split those up. But for now, at this current iteration of advanced vCarving, it's going to be exported just in one file. So do take note of that. Fusion 360 questions. How to make 3D fillets. So if you need to make a, what do you mean by 3D fillet? Like on, let me pull up an example and you can tell me if this is relevant or not. So if you create some 3D geometry and you throw a fillet around the edges, let's make that 0.25 inches. That's what you get. Do you mean how do you machine that? And I'll just carry on for a moment. T-slots versus threaded holes. What is more versatile in your opinion? I am personally of the opinion that threaded holes just give you a little more repeatability. T-slots are super versatile. Like if you have different sized like boards that you're trying to hold down, you can stretch and move things infinitely. But with clamps and being able to move them around, I kind of like just the fixed positions that I can sort of just reference off of. If you give me an infinite amount of choice, I'll kind of like not know where to start. But if I always know like, oh, this is the hole where I normally clamp from, it sort of constrains the problem a little bit, and I can like bolt down a vise to the same area. So just based on the way I work hold, a threaded table works better for me. But if you're doing like signs or large things, or you want to hold down like large sheets of plywood, A T-slot might give you that flexibility you need. It really just depends on the kinds of things you're making. How often will we be doing these Q&As? Depends. Right now, either every week or every 2 weeks, probably, at least until the quarantine situation improves. Carbide Motion 5 will joystick controls still be mapped to keys? I believe these are... It's a lower level implementation. It's not just pretending the D-pad is the arrow keys, because we are reading in the right and left triggers and bumpers, and the triggers are analog inputs, so there's a conversion happening there. CM5 and pendant control. If your pendant emulates the keyboard presses, you could do that, or if you try and emulate a controller. Yeah, that's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. How do I create a half circle in Carbide Create? Great question. I was going to make a video about how to do Boolean operations, and it's not terribly difficult, but it's just a matter of knowing where to look for that function. So if you draw a circle, and then you draw a square, rectangle, whatever, you can subtract one thing from another. So I'm going to select the circle, select the rectangle, and then, I wish there was text that popped up sooner, Boolean subtraction. You can remove 1/2 of the shapes from each other. How do I keep the button on my bit setter from sticking? Usually, if you just sort of give it a little tap, it'll unstick itself. If you have continuous issues, feel free to reach out to support, and they can help you out with that. You might need a new bushing or bearing in there or something. Complete CNC novice, you can cut softwood with a PCB engraver for about 1mm engravers. It really just depends on picking speeds and feeds that'll work. So you can start with our speeds and feeds if you want to engrave. So if you pick a contour and then you select a, let me pick a hardwood engraver 501 and then no offset. Let me get these out of the way. You'll have a toolpath that, depending on how deep I set this to cut, will basically just make a groove. The simulation doesn't show it perfectly, but this is the path that the engraver will follow, and it's just going to cut a V groove into your wood. The speeds and feeds we have set are pretty conservative, like feed rate of 15 inches per minute, depth of pass of 8 thou, so 2 sheets of paper, that deep. You can go deeper, you can go shallower, but like I'll post a picture later, but what I found was the biggest variable in whether or not your cut came out well or poorly was the type of wood. So really fibrous things like red oak, not so good. A walnut or like a nice dry fine-grained wood will receive an engraving much better. So play around with it, but just treat a 1mm engraver like anything else. Is carbide copper dead? It is not, but we only have one programmer, so when we're working on new features, it's sort of, we jump around between different softwares. So right now the big push is Carbide Motion, Carbide Create. Eventually we'll cycle back to Carbide Copper. How do you do V-carve inlay with the new Carbide Motion? So that's not officially supported yet. If you want to figure out how to do it, you're welcome to. But right now, the toolpath is just designed to create a pocket. So if you want to create an advanced V-carve in this area, you're going to come up with a toolpath that looks like show simulation. Give that a sec. It's a lot of toolpath to calculate. Hold on. Wrong tool selected. I think we don't want the engraver. Select tool. Let's pick a random flat end mill. 201. That should go a little faster. So if you have a shape like this, you are, to create the inverse of that, you actually have to cut something that's going to end up being a little smaller near the top of it. So if you imagine like a pyramid goes into a receiving valley, the top of that pyramid or plateau mesa thing has to be the same diameter or the same width as the bottom of the valley. So you'd have to do a little contour offsetting to make it work. I'll play around with that. I'll see if I can maybe knock that out. But for now, we're just thinking about how to pocket out V-carve. Okay. How bummed am I about AU being postponed? So Autodesk University, I have not been going to because it is extremely expensive. But Fusion Academy, I am quite bummed about that because that was one of the big events that I was looking forward to because as a big CNC nerd, like those are my people. Other than Maker Faire, which is a really different crowd, that's like Fusion Academy is where you get to mingle with all the CNC nerds and machinists that you look up to, like Saunders, and like you can mingle with the Autodesk elite who, if you've ever complained on the forums, they're probably the ones that are answering your questions. And so it's nice to put a face to the name and actually say like, hey, thanks for putting up with my griping. So hopefully that still goes on this year, but yeah, little disappointed about that. Any info on the old Carbide Connect concept would be great to manage through a browser. I think you're talking about the ability to open up Carbide Create remotely through a web browser. That unfortunately was lost when we switched to the native implementation of Carbide Motion. So Carbide Motion used to be basically a glorified browser window, and now it's a proper native application. It's a lot more responsive. We might be able to bring that back, but because it's no longer a browser, it's much harder to transmit that over the network. Oh god, so many comments. Any chance we'll be seeing some measurement tools in CC? A tape measure would be great. I agree. I hope Rob is listening and he will implement that. I would also hope for some more demarcations along the sides so you can see like, oh, this is 1 inch, 2 inches instead of just the grid pattern. But trust me, I have been harassing him about that for the past 3 months. What is the best place to start with 3D carving? That's a pretty broad question. It could just be like what software or what to carve, or how to carve. But I would say start with a ball end mill. Start with a really basic program, because whichever software solution you choose, Meshcam, Fusion, Create Pro, Vectric, they're all going to have a bit of a learning curve. Just come up with a basic, simple project, maybe like a sign with a 3D contoured engraving or a topographic carving. Work from there. Get a nice selection of ball end mills, 1/4 inch for larger round dished bowl shapes, smaller ones if you want to do the topographic carvings. Really open-ended question, but if you throw an example, I'll try and address it. In other motion control software, do you allow to see a preview of the paths? Does Carbide allow the same? We don't have a toolpath preview in Carbide Motion yet. It's something we could potentially implement, but right now we're focused on core functionality, making sure the experience is as streamlined and understandable for like the average user as possible. We might add it in the future, can't make any promises yet. Carbide Create in beta, 30-day license. Pro hasn't been released yet. Can that license be extended? I believe you can just request a new license and then just input that in. V-carve inlay with new CM. Carbide Create, not Carbide Motion, but hopefully eventually I'm going to really push for that. ATC for the Shape Boko. That's a fun one. I would love that. The problem is we're not sure how many people are going to buy like a $1,000 to $2,000 machine and then spend another $1,000, $1,500 for an ATC. It would be cool. We have seen people try and implement that. Consider it on the back burner. Let's see. Thank you. I love you, Winston. I love you too. Are quarter-inch end mills useful with the Nomad when cutting aluminum? Yes and no. So quarter-inch end mills generally require a lot more torque to use, and for the Nomad that's not great. But if you use a single flute end mill and you use like an adaptive toolpath, or you're just doing facing, that quarter-inch diameter cutter has a much faster edge velocity, and that'll leave a much nicer surface finish, and it'll be quieter. So our 278 actually works really well. It'd be nicer if we got it a little shorter so it didn't stick out of the collet so much, but you can use a quarter-inch end mill if you're smart about it. Any pre-made tools out there to load into Fusion 360 with feeds and speeds already set up for different materials? Unfortunately, the tool library in Fusion can be really daunting to deal with, so I have sort of set up, we have like the standard Carbide 3D tool library. I have just duplicated it and then gone in there and messed with the speeds and feeds, but it's not great. If you're using Fusion, you're going to be using a variety of different tool paths. You're going to be doing contouring, you're going to be doing adaptive clearing, facing, pocketing. Each one of those, you're going to want to tailor the speeds and feeds a little bit. So it's really hard to find a one-size-fits-all like set of settings that you can load with the tools. Even if you just split them up, like I have a library for wood or aluminum, you're going to have to use a little bit of instinct and gut feeling for which settings to use for which tool paths. For me, I sort of know, like, if I'm cutting aluminum, start at about 10 thou, 0.01 inches or quarter millimeter, and then aim for a certain chip load. But it's going to be something you're going to have to feel out. Take notes when you're machining. See what works for you, what doesn't work for you. If you're cutting something, if you think you can go faster, try bumping up the feed rate override. See if you can push it a little harder. If so, when you go back to your computer, change your speeds and feeds, change your recipe. It's a continuous learning process. Any update on when Sweepy will be back in stock for the Shapeoko router? Let's see, today is March 20th. I don't want to make any promises because I haven't talked with my boss yet, but hopefully April, I would say. Fusion Academy, yep, I understand you. Looking forward to seeing the new Carbide Motion. Is there a way to set up custom third-party touch probes? There is not, unfortunately, just because our probing interface is sort of hard-coded to a 25 millimeter tall probe. If your third-party probe is that tall, great. If not, I don't think we're going to plan on opening that up to make it just so you can input whatever the thickness of your probe is. How soon will the Nomad be back in stock? Unfortunately, that depends a lot on the coronavirus thing going on right now. Just because the Torrance shop where we do a lot of the Nomad fulfillment production is in California. And so we're currently kind of hit by the restrictions in place about essential businesses. So as soon as the situation improves, we will hopefully see it be back in stock. Let's see. Report that the Lady Carbide Motion has been working great on my Fusion 5 tablet as a full touchscreen controller. Glad you're seeing that. So Carbide Motion 5 still technically in beta. We'd love to get feedback on that. So yeah, go try it out. But all in all, it seems to be a win on all fronts. Any thoughts on making STL carving more accessible, mesh cam-like? I'm assuming you mean on the Carbide Create side. It is possible that we might be able to bring that feature over, but that is a question for my boss, and especially since there are two different products right now that we don't necessarily want them to step on each other's toes. It might end up just, if you want to use STLs, use Meshcam. If not, use Carbide Create Pro. We'll see. Let's see. Loved your Fusion chats. Any chance for more? So I used to do a little live stream on my own channel called the Fusion Side Chat, where I just talk with my buddy over in New Jersey about just various Fusion topics. Since I've moved, it's been a little hard to find time to do that, but I would love to bring that back, especially if I can shake off the live streaming rust. Let's see. Nomad or Shapeoko closed loop? No, they are not. It's just open loop based on the stepper motor. If you're worried that you're drifting between different runs of your G-code, you can try rehoming the machine. You don't need to turn it on or turn it off and back on again. You can just go into the MDI window or tab and then type $H, and that'll trigger a homing cycle just to make sure that if you did drift off course or you missed a step, you can reset that. What programs do I use for design, and do I have any tips when importing? 90% of what I do is in Fusion, and I do a little bit of Carbide Create, and in those softwares, it's sort of a one-stop shop. You can do CAD and CAM, but it really depends on what kinds of things you're making. If you're making a sign, Carbide Create's great. If you want to make like a lightsaber, you might need something like Fusion. Any plans to do something like probing the board, creating a Z adjustment mesh? Not sure. I have to talk with Rob about that. Maybe when we get back to updating Carbide Copper. Where do you download the default tool library? That is a good question. Let's see. Fusion 360 Tools Carbide 3D. There's a link to a tool library somewhere. I linked to it on my site, and I also put a link to it in the Carbide forums. So if you go there, I could have sworn I left it somewhere. I'll put a link to this when I post this, but carbide3d.com/files/fusion360/carbide3d.json. That should give you all the cutters minus the Amano ones. I haven't added those in yet, but that should be enough to get you started. Tool library presets has defaults. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Sorry guys, there are a lot of messages. What's a good end mill for making holes in 2mm aluminum with the Nomad? I would say 16th inch end mill. 16th inch being just under 2mm, which is like 0.079. And then use a boring operation if you're using Fusion, or just do a really shallow depth of cut pocket or contour in Carbide Create. How do you get aluminum swarf out of your hands? Asking for a friend. Yeah, that's tough. It's just really gently scrubbing your hands under running water. It's messy. So anyone cutting aluminum should be prepared on cleaning that up in a painful way. When will the HDZ and Plus be available for purchasing? Yep, CJ's got it. Proximity switches more accurate than mechanical switches. It really, for the kinds of machines that we're using, it really doesn't matter. The resolution of the Shapeoko is theoretically 1/40th of a millimeter. For the Nomad, it's 1/200th. You're talking about a difference of like a thou, if that. Both of them are totally fine, in my opinion. I actually haven't upgraded to inductive switches or the proximity switches at home, so I use them interchangeably. I don't really worry about the precision there. I've been using double-sided tape for my projects. Are there cases where you're aware where double-sided tape is best avoided for cutting wood materials? The only time where I would highly recommend against using double-sided tape is if you have a cupped or warped board, because then you don't get good surface contact between the board and your waste board. And if that happens, if you can feel a little rocking in the board, it's not going to be held securely. In those cases, you'll want to hold it down from the sides or from like top clamps. But if you also do clamping from the side, so like our gator tooth clamps, they have a hole in the back side where you can stick in a little grub screw and it comes in at an angle. That will hold the material from the side. You can also use the cam style clamps, and that will hopefully, if your material is tall enough, let you surface it completely, get a perfectly flat side before you flip it over, and then you can use that flat side to put tape on. Manual for Z Plus Carbide docks, hopefully soon. Take that I'm trying to set up, it uses Mach 3. Do you think it's similar to the CNC machine? I believe Mach 3 is a fairly generic post-processor, so in terms of the G-code it's pretty similar, but in terms of architecture it is a completely different machine. Another low-profile vise that I would recommend other than the Carbide 3D low-profile vise. Let's see, off the top of my head, I only really know of the Little Machine Shop vise. They have a fairly small, compact vise that will fit on the Nomad. Also, the Saunders mod vise system is pretty good and can be adapted to work with the Nomad. So, like, one of these, they're going to cut into your vertical clearance a little bit, but I mean, it'll be a sturdier, compact option. Consistent onion skins. Toilet paper is getting scarce over here. Make sure you start with a level wasteboard, like machine surface it so that you know it's perfectly flat, and then maybe double-sided tape, and then just surface it down to about 4th thou or so. Is Carbide 3D going to come out with a rotary 4th axis? We would love to, but again, our development cycle isn't quite there yet, so no promises. Let's see. Favorite project to date? Knife project, for sure. So for those of you that don't know or missed it, last year, Carbide camp knife, I made a little camp knife to take on my trips, and that project, aside from giving me, like, instilling in me the fear of God for machining steel on a Nomad, also gave me a lot of insight into the material properties and everything I learned in material science about steel, heat treating it, the metallurgy, the grain structure, how to machine G10, how do you assemble all this, how do you do all the hand finishing. That project for me was a ton of fun because it was so multidisciplinary. Thank you for time for doing the live stream and engage with the community. You are very welcome. Let's see. Just know if the TP turns out you first. Laser cutting of acrylic on the Shapeoko. Not that I know of, mainly because to cut acrylic you can't use an optical wavelength. So those blue lasers that you see aren't going to affect acrylic. It's just going to go straight through. The lasers that cut acrylic are CO2. They fire in the infrared spectrum, and that's what you need. And it's, as far as I know, no one's retrofitted a laser tube of that size on the Shapeoko. It's usually just those optical 450 nanometer diodes. Speeds and feeds for new materials. It's really just going based off of speeds and feeds that you sort of know and are comfortable with, and then expanding from there. So let's say I get a new end mill and I'm trying to cut aluminum. If I'll try and find the nearest recipe. So if it's another 2 flute, if there are a different angle helix or there's something else different about it, I'll start with like the recipe for the 102, try it out and work from there. It's really just, you can try and just look up in a chart like what's your chip load, what's your surface footage, and come up with a recipe cold, but I like to just evolve a known recipe. How difficult to switch back to a stable version if we try a beta? As long as you keep the installer, you can just double click it and it'll overwrite the old install. And we should always have the latest non-beta version available for you to download. Alright, did I finally catch up with the chat? That should be good. So while we're here, I figured I'd also maybe just show off a little bit of what Carbide Create Pro can do. Because I know I've been resisting making a video about it because I'm always using Fusion. So I figured I'd just show you how it works and just basically what you can do with it, and then let you guys run with it. So let me just minimize everything, reopen Carbide Create. Ben, I do not. I can't say I don't love Carbide Create, but my ambitions exceed what I can do in Create. So the way Pro works, it is a rudimentary 3D modeling setup, but it's not like Fusion. It's not parametric. You don't draw sketches and extrude them. It's additive. So if you know like how grayscale height maps work, the lighter areas are taller, darker areas are lower. In Carbide Create Pro, you're basically building your own grayscale height map. So if I, let's say, draw a square, and then I draw a circle, I can add them up and make a shape with them. So I'm going to do, in my rectangle, I'm going to build up some material. So I'm going to create a flat area that is 1 inch tall, and I'm going to call this like main body. And then I'm going to just show it. I've created a square block. Nothing spectacular. If I pick the circle and I subtract material from it, and I subtract, let's see, 0.25 inches, I have broken something. Please hold. I swear this worked before. I will get back to this. Demos never work perfectly. Any chance that Carbide Motion will eventually have a plugin framework? It'd be cool to build a crowdsourced solution that others can use, like a fourth axis or custom probing solution. So the problem with that is that right now we are, it's sort of like the Apple versus Android problem, where we know exactly what hardware we have and what our board is capable of, and until we have like a fourth axis driver or like a USB plug on it to plug in various accessories, we're only designing for our own accessories. So if we ever get that far, maybe, but I can't make any promises on that front. All right, so let me try this again. Let me go angled 0.5, subtract, and then I'll call this a dish, apply. All right, I think I have to restart Carbide Create. This worked when I was not in trial, so we'll get back to that. You know, I've actually managed to cut some almost veneer-like pieces of wood just by contouring something, getting a little too close to the edge of my stock, and you can actually see through some of the grain. Planning a new project series for the Carbide YouTube channel. Yes, I just don't know what yet. Just because of the release cycle for like new accessories and stuff, my video schedule has mainly been focused on just like, hey, here's Advanced V-Carve, hey, here's Carbide Motion 500. If you guys have any suggestions on projects that I can do that would be a multi-part series, or more than just like how to make a coaster, feel free to share them in the comments, because I could use some ideas. Have I fallen in love with 3D printing yet? Not really, kind of, but no. It's a good means to an end, but I haven't really. It's not something I choose to do just for fun. I use it because I need to do it, because there are some cases where 3D printing is the best way to come up with a geometry, particularly if your part is like, if you take the box dimension of it, if it's like 90% empty space, there's not much of a reason to machine away 90% of the material just to be left with like a shell or like a U channel or something like that. RC truck like Traxxas out of aluminum. It's possible. I am fairly inspired by Johnny Q90. He does a lot of really cool work with like mini RC engines and stuff, but that does require a bit of electronics work, which scares me. And yeah, what is this and why was this in my recommendations? Well, if you're just joining us, I am hosting an open forum about CNC, specifically for Carbide Create and Fusion 360. Hey chat, how's it going? It's your official brushless spindle on the roadmap, at least for your personal machines. So the spindle for the Nomad is technically brushless, but of course we'd always want more power. For my own machines, probably not. If I were to go with like the next step up beyond a router, it'd probably be like a Chinese VFD, but I am not quite there yet. What do I use the most? Shapeoko versus Nomad. I personally use the Shapeoko more, just because my projects are tend to be larger, and I like the material removal rate of the router, which is 1.25 horsepower versus like the sub 100-watt spindle on the Nomad. So I can just plow through aluminum a lot faster, and my requirements for accuracy aren't nearly as stringent. So I usually just say, screw it, I'm going to do it on the Shapeoko. It's faster, and it's bigger, so I can just like clamp things all over the place and not worry about running out of work area. Hello, Brazil. Shapeoko on a Raspberry Pi. Carbide Motion does not run on a Raspberry Pi, but you can stream G-code to Gerbil from just about any USB device. So if you find a G-code sender that will run on the Raspberry Pi, you can use that to connect to the Shapeoko. Make an add-on for a beefier Nomad motor. You know, if there's enough interest, we might just not make an add-on and improve it, but that's something down the road. Anyway, there will be a way to save the 3D model made in Create Pro, so it can be exported to Fusion 360. Ideally, you'd be able to just make it in Fusion 360 to begin with. I'm not sure what the use case would be to take a height map like that and bring it into Fusion 360. I think you can export it, but I'll have to get back to you on that. Can you run... Let's see. Put C... So yeah, Ben just chimed in. You can put CNC.js on a Raspberry Pi, and then from that you can have just a little Raspberry Pi connected to your Shapeoko and run it that way. I love you too, greatest ever. Okay, so how are we doing on time? 1:48. So it's almost 50 minutes. Not bad. I'm gonna go through a little bit of other stuff in the meantime. Let me show you an example with a topographic map in Carbide Create Pro. I'm just going to download one of these images. Save image as desktop. So because Carbide Create Pro, which hopefully won't act up on me again, works based off a height map, we can import just about any grayscale image and then use that to create our geometry. And it works the same way it does in Meshcam. So if I import my topographic map, actually I think I need to, there we go. If I import the grayscale image, I can use that and create something like this. And then I can go to the toolpath area, but I need to constrain it, I believe. So I'll have a rectangle and say like, hey, I want to, within this rectangle, do a 3D rough. It'll make a toolpath. It takes a little bit to generate, but it'll let you mill out 3D shapes. And then the finishing strategy is just parallel. So it doesn't give you as much control as Fusion, but it will be sufficient to cut out these basic shapes. So that's our 3D roughing toolpath. Ignore the time estimate just because I haven't played with my speeds and feeds. If I apply a 3D finishing strategy, it's going to create parallel toolpaths and then machine out a much smoother contour. So that is one potential use case for Carbide Create Pro. Can you purchase different lengths of X or Y rails separately for the Shapeoko? Unfortunately not. Just to keep our supply chain manageable, we got our extrusions cut to a fixed length. So if you want like more rails, you could buy a expansion kit, but we don't sell custom lengths. Able to send signals to the Shapeoko mainboard for other accessories, laser power relays. You can pull off, there's one digital output that you could tap into that'd normally be reserved for coolant. So I've seen one guy, he basically made a relay board that could turn like a fan or a vacuum on and off or something. So you could modify something like that, but to make use for it, you can DIY your own thing, or there's a chance we might be able to release something to allow you to do that in the future. Any chance of being able to pick climb or conventional in the future? Trust me, I have argued for that many times. Leave a comment in the forums, and if there's enough interest, if I can convince my boss to do it, we will add it. Fusion has a ton more options for CAM because Fusion is it's almost industrial grade software. I wouldn't use this if I were Boeing, but the feature set within it is really high-end professional stuff. So there are more options there, but the learning curve is also really steep. Will you continue to do these chat sessions? I will try to, so long as I have internet and so long as I am stuck at home quarantined. We'll probably try and do this weekly. We might switch up the dates just so that we can try and hit people on different time zones or who have different schedules. But yeah, I would love to do another series of these. Hopefully when I'm back in the shop, or if I can get better Wi-Fi out in my garage, I'll actually be able to run out with a camera and like point at things on the CNC, and we can talk about stuff like that. What software do you get when you buy a Shapeoko? So with any of the Carbide 3D products, we provide Carbide Create for free, and you can actually use that with any CNC. When you export the G-code, it's designed for Gerbil, so any Gerbil compatible CNC will take it, and we are slowly building out extensions to allow you to potentially plug in your own post-processor. So if you want to use Carbide Create with a different CNC, write your own post-processor and you can export compatible G-code. We're just building this out in case we add more features and this becomes a more compelling product against something like Fusion. It's not, but for like maybe an intermediate step between regular Carbide Create and Vectric, as we add more features and toolpaths, people might want to use it even more. So we're just keeping that option open. We also have Carbide Motion, that is our CNC control and G-code sending software. So you can make your toolpaths in whatever you want, Carbide Create, Fusion, Vectric, whatever, and then to transmit that program to the CNC so it follows those toolpaths and cuts out what you want, you would use Carbide Motion, or if you find a third-party solution like CNC.js, you're welcome to use that as well. Open source CAD modeling tools. Unfortunately, post Shapeoko 2 days, I sort of stopped dabbling in that, and I've just been immersed in my my Fusion madness. But if anyone else has any recommendations on open source CAD modeling, feel free to chime in. Yeah, you can control laser or like a VFD using a pulse width modulated signal. There is a pin for that. Fusion is completely online. That is one of the downsides. There is a small grace period. You can still use it offline for like 30 days, but you won't be able to upload to shared projects or anything like that. So it is nice to have an offline solution. Better camera controls versus scrolling in and out to pan the view around. If you right click and hold in Carbide Create, you can pan left and right. Let me know if that answers your question. Drill with a center cut end mill. The rigidity will allow the Nomad to pop right through. You can do regular drilling operations in Fusion. Carbide Create does not support them. You could do it potentially in Carbide Copper. Anything more than about a 1/16 of an inch or 2 millimeters, though, you might start to get torque issues with just the friction. So you might want to use PEC drilling if you're going to do that. You can also use like a PCB drill, so like a solid carbide tooling that tapers down to whatever diameter hole you want. Those are pretty useful instead of using like a regular drill bit, which has the shank is the same diameter as the cutting flutes. What about a cutter? Keep the cutter down for pocketing like 5/8 inch holes. Needless up and down. In Carbide Create, we don't have like a safe retract height and like a rapid plunge to just before the cut. In Fusion, you would have a lot more flexibility in terms of specifying those things. We could consider it in the future. The tool pathing is pretty basic right now. It's just when you finish a step down, retract to go back down. I would say try and minimize your retract height above the stock. The default is like 0.1 inches or something, and it's like if you retract that far and have to like plunge at like 2 inches per minute going back down, it'll take a while. So just minimize that height if you can. What about a gearbox that attaches to the router, reduces speed, so you can do drilling with an actual drill? You could potentially do that with a planetary gear set. It'd be a weird addition to see on a router, though. Also, you have to make sure you don't block the exhaust outlet. Yeah, PEC drilling is great. So for those of you that don't know, PEC drilling is basically just when you plunge into the material a fixed depth, retract, and just go down in fixed increments, but you're stopping at each layer, at each step down, and you retract and you can clear chips. You can break chips if you're getting like long strands pulling out of the hole, and it also just, for a low-powered machine like the Nomad, lets you build up that RPM again. Really useful. Let's see. Have you cut stock in your machine that was longer than your machine? Can you tell about how you index the workpiece? Sure. There's actually a project that I haven't made a video for, if I can find it, where I was making a sign, and the sign was like 30 inches long, and I only had a regular Shapeoko 3 to work with. So what I did was, normally in something like Vectric, there's a tiling function. I was using Fusion, so I had to get a little creative. When you're doing multiple setups, you always want to have something you can index off of, and so I like to drill holes in known places on my stock where you can just index off of, and then if I drill 2 additional holes in the wasteboard, I can always line those things up with an indexing pin. So this was a sign that I made for my buddy George, and the way this works is you cut in sections at a time. So in the first section, you'll cut the top area. This is a containment boundary. It restricts the cutting area to what fits on the stock Shapeoko 3, and then I drill pinholes in the bottom. And then when I'm ready, I have 2 matching holes in the wasteboard, like that would be up here. So once I mill out like the first part of the sign, the J, I slide the whole board up, lock in those pinholes into the indexing holes that I made in the wasteboard, mill out the second section of text, and then drill out the pinholes, and then continue just sliding it up and passing it through. So that's why in my enclosure I actually made like a little cutout in the back so I could pass material all the way through the machine. Unfortunately, that never really worked out, but it is an option. Or you could just use something like Vectrix. I think VCarve or Aspire, they have a tiling option built in. This is more of a little bit of a hack. So I used a 3D contour toolpath. And a 3D contour, basically, it picks up walls in your geometry, just all of it. You can restrict it to work within a certain area, and then you can also tell it to not touch certain regions. So I told it, don't touch these walls that are going to be cut by the next section, and don't touch the inside walls that I cut in a previous operation. Do you know why when I start Carbide Create I get an error message? Click on it, it loads. I'm not sure. Try doing a fresh install, and if you still get an issue, feel free to reach out to support. What I do for an indexing pin? I just go to McMaster and I buy pins. You can also probably find these on Amazon, or you can even just use a regular old dowel. They don't need to be precision ground. I just like having these handy. But just simple little, actually not even that, dowel pins. Get a pack of these, get them in 1/4 inch, get them in 1/8 inch, whatever you need. But again, you don't need to go to McMaster. You can find these on Amazon. You can also just use like regular 1/4 inch rod stock, aluminum or wooden dowels that you get from the hardware store. I need to see your enclosure. How come it didn't work out? You can, if you just search Shapeoko enclosure and my name, you should be able to find it. Just on my channel, Winston Makes. There are a lot of things I change about it, but for building an enclosure, I would recommend just making sure it's got a nice height so that you can lean into it without smacking your head. That's a big one. Just think about the ergonomics of the enclosure you're building. The shank of the tool and the cutting diameter of the tool can be different. Yes, collets have many sizes within their type. If you want to keep the same collet, get a tool with the diameter you need. Yeah, so collets have a crush range. You can't take like a 1/4 inch collet and put an 1/8 inch tool. It doesn't compress that far without damaging the collet. You can get third-party collets that will do like 3/16 of an inch or like 1, 2, 3, whatever millimeters. But router collets, they don't have as much flexibility in them as an ER collet system, which you can get in like 1/2 millimeter increments for like every single size. So that is the one convenient thing about using an ER collet system. Reducing noise with an enclosure. The enclosure will reduce the noise, and it'll take out a lot of the high frequency, like really shrill noises that make you want to like shove earplugs as deep into your ear canals as possible. But there will be some low frequency noise that would probably get filtered by your walls anyway. If you want quiet cuts, the best thing you can do is to manage your depth of cut. The Shapeoko can cut fairly deep, even the Nomad, but it's not going to sound great depending on how you push it. You're going to have to back off on your settings to find a nice happy medium between speed and the sound quality, because you don't want it to sound like chattery or just really loud or angry. If you take light cuts, especially with small end mills, it can be fairly quiet. Different size drill bits in the Shapeoko, and when you have a limited number of collet sizes. So the best thing to do is to just not use a drill. For most people, the only reason to use a drill is to get a very tight tolerance hole. So if you want an 1/8 inch hole and you want it to be 0.125 inches, no more, no less, give or take a small margin, use a drill bit and or use a reamer. But if you need just a variable size hole, you can do that with a regular end mill that is smaller in diameter than the hole you're making. So let's say I want to make a, let's say 0.375 inch hole. Just going to draw that in Fusion, extrude it out. You can also do this in Carbide Create, you just don't have as many tool pathing options. So I've got a hole. I don't have a drill bit that can cut that, but when I create my cam to machine out that hole, I can use a boring operation. Sorry guys, I'm losing my voice. And that will create a helical toolpath that spirals to the bottom, and it'll mill out an area that's wider than the end mill itself. So let's say 1/4 inch end mill. That's what the end mill is going to do, all the way to the bottom, and leave you with whatever size hole you want. So a boring operation, or if you do it with a contour operation, that works too. Same 1/4 inch end mill, multiple depths. The tool will just step down, machine out basically a little pocket, and just keep going down until you get the whole diameter you want. This works for any hole that is, like, I'd say about 10% larger than the diameter of your cutter, up to, well, basically an infinite size. If you're using like an 1/8 inch end mill, you're going to be stuck with a little bit of extra material in the core of the hole. Usually that's not a problem. So if I simulate this, you can see that there's a little plug that's left. You can, if you use a pocketing operation, that'll take care of it. Or with a bore or a contour in Fusion, you can add an extra pass. So if I do multiple passes, you can see that I'll bore out the middle first, take out that little core, and then slowly step outward. So that's how I would recommend attacking holes on a CNC. 95% of the time, this is perfectly accurate, especially if you take a finishing pass, just to make sure that there's no leftover material in the holes. They're fairly circular. There's not really a lot of, like, if they're coming out clearly oval shape, you might need to tune your machine. But for the most part, the holes that I've machined out like this work just fine. You can always also go in, adjust stock to leave, and say, hey, I need this hole to be like an extra negative 0.01 inches wider. And that'll just push out the end mill a little bit more so that it'll just take off a little extra in case you need to dial in the diameter of that hole. Yeah, it's super boring, I know. Good dad joke. Dust boot in stock for the Shapeoko. With all the supply chain disruptions, hopefully April, I know. I don't have a good answer. I don't know exactly. Haven't talked to my boss this morning yet. Hopefully that doesn't mean I'm fired. Let's see. I was trying to reduce chatter in a pocket operation with a 1/4 radius end mill. Should I add more depth of cut and lower my feed rate? Reducing depth of cut and reducing feed rate will both reduce the forces on your spindle, so that's a good way to just back off in general. Other things you might want to try is to reduce step over, and potentially use adaptive clearing if you're comfortable with Fusion. Add 3D and Carbide Standard is... So Carbide Create Standard, I think the intent is to mainly be a 2D, 2.5D CAD CAM solution. Pro is going to be where the 3D stuff comes in. Thinking of using a Rockler rail setup. Anyone else doing this? I've seen people doing it. I mean, as long as you attach it to the wasteboard securely, it'll probably work. I like to keep my MDF just a little proud of everything, just so you can surface that. And just so if you cut a little too deep, you don't run into the rails. Can you use grinding bits in the Nomad? Technically, you can, but you'd have to feed really slowly because you can't trust that. Like when you use a Dremel, you can't just plow through like granite or whatever it is you're carving really quickly. So your feed rate's going to be super low. And depending on what you're grinding, you really want to use some sort of dust collection or like a little water drop system just to keep abrasive dust from getting in the bearings and electronics. Work holding tabs in Fusion. Sure. In 2D, that's actually really easy. So when you create a 2D toolpath around an object, second tab, there is a tabs option. You can pick rectangular tabs, you can pick triangular tabs, really just personal preference, and then you can set them by distance. So if I say every 1 inch, they'll center themselves on the walls, or I can do at points, and I can say, hey, I want to tab here, I want to tab here, one here, and so on and so forth. So that's the tab system in Fusion. Oh, grinding bits for surface finishing? Potentially. I mean, the old JPL Richard, the old CNC curmudgeon, he used to do, I think he used his Shapeoko as a surface grinder. You basically just put the wheel in the router. You can. I don't know if it's going to give you a better finish than just a nice finishing end mill, depending on what material you're cutting. Let's see. If you really want those microns, you might want to get like a super high RPM, high precision spindle. Let's see. And we are running a little long, but if there are any last minute questions, I'm happy to answer them. And as always, if you have any machine issues, feel free to reach out to support. I'm going to put out a little more content with just some of the basic Carbide Create stuff as we go forward. Have I worked with glass before? I have not. I've seen people use diamond drag engraving bits on glass. I've heard of people trying to cut glass. There is actually a machinable ceramic that people use as insulators for like electronics components. I have not seen glass itself machined though, at least not with a CNC router. You should look up Kern Microtechnik. They're a high-end German tool builder. Their machines start in the 6-digit range. They have machined glass before. Roundover bit in Fusion 360. The answer is yes. It's not easy, but you can. Where's the last time I did a roundover toolpath? Give me a second. My memory is failing me right now. It was in something... Oh, my resin tray. I tried to use a roundover bit there, and it kind of worked. I just didn't get the Z offset right. So let's see. Total Boat resin experiments. Valet tray. So I programmed in a basic roundover bit that I got from Melon Tools, and I tried to apply it around the fillets because it's a lot faster to cut these fillets out in 1 or 2 passes. Melon Tools. So you need to program in your own corner radius roundover bit, cutter type, radius mill, apply whatever settings you have. I think I had my tip length off just a little bit because the edge of the roundover was a little too low. That value wasn't given to me on the packaging of the tool, so I didn't know exactly what it should be. But assuming you have all the specs right, what you would do once you have a corner radius tool in place is to, let's see, top operations, corner radius tool. This is just a 2D contour with the corner radius tool selected. I picked the outer edges of what I wanted to cut. I did a little bit of adjustment with my stock to leave just to push it out and up a little bit. And that toolpath will give you something that looks like that. So it's going to come in and it's going to cut that corner radius. Now, I left a little stock to leave because I wasn't sure if my part had moved a little bit, and it did. The tray started bowing as I was cutting. So the material was higher up than I expected, and the tool left a little bit of a, you could see the line on the top edge of the tray. But yes, you can do corner radiusing. Live stream tomorrow? Probably not. Next week? Very likely, just because I need to get my voice back. I'm not used to talking. I am a terrible public speaker, by the way. In high school, we did there's like a speech giving little course that we did, and I was a train wreck in there. Let's see. All right, we are 15 minutes over, so if that is all, I will bid you all good day, and hope you all have a productive weekend, and stay safe out there. Great chatting with y'all, and leave any questions in the forums, and I'll try and compile them up for next time, so that we have a little something to talk to, assuming people don't come with their own questions. All right, so it's been a blast. Have a good one. Stay safe. Don't die. And take care, folks.